Hey guys, it's Jayden Clark here with Jazz Lesson Videos, and today I'll be talking all about ear training. I believe the perfect jazz musician is one that has their ear and their technique perfectly in sync, allowing them to execute their ideas with complete freedom. Being able to use your ear as an improvising jazz musician is one of the most useful skills we can have, as it's going to help with our transcription and our transposition. Having a good ear can also help us get out of sticky situations, whether we've lost the form or perhaps we've called a tune that we don't know so well on the bandstand. So what are some of the things we can do to improve our ear? I'm going to show you 5 different exercises that will address just this. You'll be able to find all of these exercises and more in my comprehensive ear training PDF package that I've released with Jazz Lesson Videos. In this, you'll be able to find exercises such as pitch identification, melodic dictation, interval and chord identification, and much more. To download this PDF package along with all the answer sheets and exercise recordings, you can check out the link below. The first exercise we'll check out will be interval identification. This is a natural first step when it comes to ear training, as being able to identify intervals quickly will allow us to identify melodies this way as well. A good way to start from scratch is to sing the root note of whatever interval you're trying to identify, and then sing up the scale until you reach the next note. So for example, perhaps you're dealing with a major third. What you could do is you can sing the root note. Let's take the root note C. So I'm going to call it a do. Do, right? And of course, a third up. I mean, if we're singing solfege, perhaps we want that to be an E, right? The way we get up there is we want to sing up the scale. So do, re, mi. Okay, so we've sung up a major third there. If I remember what they sound like, right? You've got do, mi, do. Okay. Now, ideally, you don't want to be doing this for very long, because we want to start associating different moods with different intervals to help us remember them. For example, let's listen to how bright the major third is. Now, compare this to the darkness of, say, a minor sixth. Okay, so we have a couple of things that we can work with in regards to hearing intervals and identifying intervals, so let's have a try of this on our own. So you're going to hear 3 examples. Each interval will be played twice before moving on to the next, so let's just see how we go. Okay, so let's go over the answers. Okay, so the first answer we have is a perfect 4. Of course, what you could do with this is you could have sung up the scales. Of course, we're hearing C every single time. Do, you could have sung up the scale, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, or, like I did in my previous example, I did some solfege, so do, re, mi, fa. Okay, so this way absolutely works. Of course, you'll find that the perfect 4th has a certain type of resonance to it that should be, well, hopefully, will be a little easier to remember. The next interval we have is a major 7. a good trick for this one is, well, of course, we hear it that it's clashing slightly, right? I mean, it's a relatively tense sounding interval, and of course that is because that's only a half step away. And of course, the final interval we have is a minor third. So of course, the minor third, anything minor, is going to have a much darker mood to it, kind of like what I mentioned with that minor sixth there. Now the minor third, I mean, even if you wanted to, you could still use our trick of counting up the scale. Of course, you're going to run into some trouble, right? So 1, 2, 3, right? So that's opposed to 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you do start to run into a little bit of a clash there, but of course, if you can identify that that is a little further below the major third, well, then we should be in good shape. But ideally, we want to remember that that is a much darker sound. Throughout my ear training package, you'll be able to practice with intervals through a variety of keys, as well as intervals in different directions, so above and below, and compound intervals, so even just the interval practice is going to keep your ear busy. Before I move on with the next exercise, I just want to give a quick note to those with perfect pitch, and that is, it will only take you so far. Now, you may find interval and pitch identification very easy in the beginning, but anything more complex like dealing with phrases and chords will require much more practice. Now, I myself have perfect pitch, but I owe my speed and accuracy when it comes to pitch and chord identification to practice. And after all, John Coltrane didn't have perfect pitch, and he was alright. The next exercise we'll cover is pitch identification, and here's a little bit of what that one sounds like. Now this is where being familiar with intervals will come in really handy, and of course it's where those with perfect pitch will have the upper hand, but I can assure you that is not going to last for long. So what we're going to do here is I'm actually going to attempt one of these myself, and I'm going to go ahead and talk through the process, right? So all I know here is that we're in C major, okay? All of these pitch identification exercises will be in C major, and I don't know what note it starts from, so I'm going to have to work with some sort of intervals. That's the kind of process that we're going to have to use here. So I'll go ahead and play this here. Okay, so again, I'm thinking of the intervals here. So if the root note is my C, you could use this same sort of process. Do, da, do, da. Okay, so we have a major 6 first, right? That's going to tell me that that is an A, and then we actually move down a whole step, right? So da, da. Okay, so we're a 5th up from the root note there, but we're moving down from the A to the G. That's a whole step, okay? Do, do. Okay, so the interval between those two notes, I'm going up to a C, of course. The interval between those two notes is a perfect 4th, okay? Da, 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 da. Okay, there's our major 7 interval. So we're actually moving down a half step there. So from C to B. Da, da. Okay, so from B to E, that is also a perfect 4th. Of course, that E is that major 3rd if you're thinking of it from the root note of C. So all up, we've got A, G, C, B, and then E. And that is that pitch identification exercise. Okay, so it's your turn now. Let's see how we go with this next pitch identification exercise. Okay, so how did we go? Let's go over the answers here now. So of course, the exercise starts off with that happy sounding major 3rd. Of course, we got that E there first. And then from the E, we move up a perfect 4th to the A. And then from that A, we then go ahead and move up a whole step to the B natural. Of course, in regards to the root note, of course, you have that major 7 that we've heard a couple of times now, that clashy interval there. And from that B, we move up a minor 3rd. Right, up a minor 3rd to the D, and then from D to G, we're moving down a fifth, right? We're thinking of it in regards to that G, of course, the interval from G to D. That is a perfect fifth. So all up, we have E, A, B, D, and then G. Now, the logical step from here is to move on with some more complex melodic dictation. So here's what an exercise like that might sound like. This is where those with perfect pitch may start to struggle if they aren't good with their rhythm. So when listening to this next example, see if you can emphasize the downbeats in some way. This could be tapping along with the recording or keeping time in your mind. So let's jump straight into this one, and I'll go over my process when we're done listening. Okay, so we'll be getting into my process here now. Of course, the past two examples you will have seen, they're actually both 2-5-1s. So we're using that harmonic device in order to help us get this phrase into our ears here. Now, of course, seeing as we do have the harmony there for us, we can then go ahead and identify the starting point. Of course, if we have our D minor 7, we've got that A there to start with. That's going to be your perfect fifth. And then what actually happens from there, you can think of this along the lines of perhaps like an A minor 7 triad, but really it's going up. It's really just going up arpeggio units. So we got A, then C, then E, then G. And then from the G, it moves down a step to the F. So it's always really handy to have chord tones landing on downbeats. In jazz, this is generally the case when it comes to good voice leading. Now, of course, the rhythm's there. You've got the first measure. You're going to have 4 eighth notes followed by a quarter note. Then you actually have an eighth note rest. So this is where it helps to be tapping. Da 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 da. Okay, and that's going to be the case with the next measure as well. Of course, we end up landing on the fourth there in the second measure. Then we get so from C to E, and then down to D, C, B, and then G, and then we have the same sort of thing there with the rhythms. Of course, they were all eighth notes. Then we have that eighth note rest before that pickup into the C major 7 measure. What you'll also notice about the G7 measure is that you have the third on the downbeat once again, so that B natural lands nicely on the downbeat, and then it descends down to the root to sort of wrap up that phrase before we have that eighth note rest. So for the C major chord, of course, we start that measure off on the root note, and then we have that big jump up, so that major 6th interval. So we have C and then A, and then the line descends a little. Okay, so we've got to be keeping these things in mind when we are writing these phrases down. We descend G, E, C, and then G, right? So there's some larger jumps there, and then from that G, of course, we move up a fifth to D, and then stepwise to E, and then of course on the downbeat of the next bar we have that fifth, and then before resolving to the root note on beat 3. So I did leave out a few notes there, but of course this is the general thought process that I go through when doing some melodic dictation like this. Next up, let's dive into some chord identification. Now with chords, we should use the same process as we do with intervals, and that is associating each chord with a mood or a feeling. So let's do exactly that by starting off with all of our triads. That is major, minor, diminished, and augmented. So now that we've heard each of these triads all in order, we can go back and think about what mood or feeling we can go ahead and associate with them. Now, I've chosen a couple of adjectives. You don't have to stick to these adjectives. You can come up with your own here, but here's what I came up with. So for major, I simply picked happy. For minor, I picked sad. Diminished, I think of as spooky. And augmented, that was a contentious one. I just said bright. So, like I mentioned, do feel free to associate your own particular feelings with each triad, as this will help you remember them much quicker. Okay, so let's test these newfound labels that we've given each triad with the next 3 triads that we'll play for you. Okay, so the first one that sounded pretty happy to me, of course, that one is major. The second one, we have our spooky sounding triad, that is diminished. And the final one, of course, we have our sad sounding triad, that is the minor triad. Next up in our chord identification will be 7 chords. The great thing about this is we can use the same or similar feelings that we use for the triads above, so let's go over a few of them now, and we'll also throw in a few additions here. Okay, so we've listened to each of our 7 chords, and of course, I used a few of the same adjectives as before, so I'm thinking of major 7 as happy, minor 7 as sad, diminished 7 as spooky, and of course we have a couple of additions here. So, the dominant 7 I used exciting. Half diminished 7 I think of as ambiguous, and the minor major 7, my word for that one is jarring. Okay, so let's see if we can put these newfound labels to the test on our 7 chords. Okay, so the first one, we have our happy sound. This is our major 7 chord. Okay, second, of course, I used the word exciting for this one. That was our dominant 7 chord. And for the last one there, we have our minor 7 chord. So, of course, our sad. Now, the final set of chords we will go ahead and identify here are 7 chords with extensions. We will jump into this one quickly, so if you feel a bit out of your depth, do not worry at all. These get really tricky and require a lot of practice to become quick. So I find that the best strategy with these kinds of chords is to first identify what kind of third there is in the chord. So that is either major or minor third. And then I go ahead and do the exact same thing with the 7th. That is, whether it's a major 7th or a minor 7th. Of course, both the major 7th and the major 3rd, along with the root note, these are considered to be our vital tones, right? So, of course, the root note determining what key we're in, the 3rd determining whether the chord is major or minor, and, of course, the 7th determining whether the chord is a major 7 or a minor 7. Once you've established these vital tones, you can then work around and identify any extensions either above the chord or within the chord. Now, you may also be able to hear the upper structure of the chord as a triad against those vital tones, and I'll get into that a little bit when going over these next few examples. Now, the first chord we have there in our examples is the dominant 7, flat 9, flat 13, and this is a super dense sounding chord, super tense sounding chord, and it is one that chord players like to throw out there very, very often, especially within 2-5-1s, usually using it in a minor 2-5-1, or perhaps they're using it to kind of spice up that major 2-5-1 as well. The next example we have is much more consonant. That is our major 7, sharp 11. Now, a lot of chord players will also voice this with a 9 on top, and as well as a 13 on top. So if you're thinking of a C major 7, sharp 11, the upper structure is actually a D major triad. So if you think about the 9th being on top, that is D. The sharp 11, F sharp, so you've got D, F sharp. And then, of course, the 13 on top is A. So, of course, what ends up happening is you have D triad over C major 7. So this makes a C major 7 sharp 11 or major 13 sharp 11. You can spell it that way as well. Of course, the final example we had there was quite a jarring chord, if we remember our adjectives, but is our minor major 9 there. So, of course, similar to our major 7 sharp 11, where I mentioned that you can have that D or that upper structure, so the D triad over C. This one we have G triad over C minor. So of course you can build it off of the 5th there, that G, then that B natural, right? And then of course the 9th on top, which is the D. So we covered a lot of chords there, and I should mention real quickly that my ear training package goes even further into depth as it mixes up all the root notes, inversions, and of course the chord qualities. So now that we are familiar with a few chords, we can now take a look at a few common chord progressions that we see throughout jazz standards. So we're going to call this one chord progression identification. So first we're going to start with 2-5-1s, and once again we can give adjectives to describe both the major and minor 2-5-1s. So let's take a listen to both of them back to back. So, like we did with our triads and our 7 chords, I'm going to call the major 2-5-1 happy and the minor 2-5-1 sad. What is also useful to recognize is when a major 2-5-1 uses a half diminished 2 chord, and when a minor 2-5-1 uses just a regular minor 7 chord. So let's take a listen to those variations now here as well. Feel free to come up with your own adjectives for each combination. Okay, so now that we've checked out those 2-5-1s, let's check out some more common harmonic devices that we hear all the time in standards. So we're going to start off with the 3-6-2-5. So, we've probably heard that one quite a few times. Of course, we mostly hear that towards the end of tunes because it wraps up nicely to the 1 chord. In fact, that's the reason we use the 3-6-2-5 a lot of the time, is just to give that forward propulsion into that 1 chord, into that consonant resolution. Of course, we also hear it in the rhythm changes as well. The next common chord progression we're going to check out is the 1 major 7 into the minor 2-5 to the 6 chord. Okay, so my best description for this chord progression is that it sounds like the harmony is all going inward. So of course we have that happy sounding 1 major 7 chord that we've described a few times throughout this video, and it moves into that minor 2-5-1 to the 6. Of course, to me that gives me a feeling of going inwards, like everything is getting darker, almost more reserved. And I'm using a bunch of different adjectives, and you can feel free to come up with some on your own as well. Where you hear that in Charlie Parker's Confirmation. You hear this device in There'll Never Be Another You. You also hear it in the Bird Blues. Okay, our next harmonic device. Kind of similar in terms of its motion, but we're going to check out the 1 major 7 to the major 2-5 to the 4. Okay, so this is a nice sounding chord progression. Of course, we're going from happy to happy, but what tends to happen in tunes that use this kind of device is it's really just a point of release, right? Of course, we get away from the original harmony and we move somewhere that is also quite consonant. So that's generally what this device is used for. I also hear it in tunes like There'll Never Be Another You. Okay, so the next chord progression we'll check out is going to be the backdoor 2-5-1. So let's take a listen here now. So this is a device in which you can use in your improvisation as a nice substitution for a 2-5-1. Now really what it's doing is, of course, we are still creating tension, it's still resolving to the 1 chord, but it gets its name because it tends to lead upwards and by step, right? So of course that dominant chord, right, the 5 chord, the backdoor 5 chord, is leading up and by whole step, and this is where it gets its name. It's as if it's coming through the back door. Now, probably the most distinct use of this device would be Charlie Parker's Yardbird Suite. Now, these are just a few of many harmonic devices that are useful for jazz musicians to be able to identify, and you'll be able to find many, many more in my ear training package. For all of what we covered today and much more, feel free to visit the link below and be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button so you can always be notified of new educational content. And as always, let us know what you'd like us to cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.